Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I'll be sharing with you all how I made this beautiful corset dress. This video would also serve as a tutorial for everyone who is interested on the basics on how to cut and sew a corset. So if this is what you're interested in, please stick around and let's get started. So first I started by drawing a line on the top of my paper to serve as a guide for other points of while drafting. So next I went ahead to mark out my chest point, my bust point, and my waist point as well as my hip points. So this is me drawing it out on a ruler just to highlight those points. So as you can see, I am labeling my bust points, my under bust points, my waist points, my chest point, which is above my bust point, and lastly my hip point. So next I went ahead to mark out 3 inches above and 3 inches below. This is to curve out my neck, to mark out my neck curve. After that, I'll go ahead and mark out half of my shoulder measurements, and then I'll mark it on the paper. I'll also go ahead and mark that same shoulder measurements on the chest line, and then I'll join those 2 points together. So next, I drafted out my shoulder slope by coming down from my shoulder line by half an inch and connecting it to my neck points. So shoulder slope is always necessary because the human body is not straight. Our shoulders are always slanted, which is why the shoulder slope is necessary. Next, I went ahead to divide my dashed line by 2 and then to come out from the midpoint by half of an inch. This would help me to draw my armhole curve. So I connected from the midpoint to the top of my shoulder, and then I will also connect from the midpoint to the down part of to the chest line. But before connecting it to the chest line, I would go ahead and measure my bust measurements and connect it to the chest line, to the half point. So after this, on the bust point line, we would go ahead and mark our half of our nipple to nipple measurements. So that same measurement, we would mark it on our under bust and on our waist point. So for this dress, the half is not going to stop at the hip. This is not a top, so we're going to stop at the half point, which is the waist. So I decided to go ahead and add half of an inch for joining allowance from the waist. So we're not going to use the hip line. So this is our allowance line. So next I would also go ahead and mark the half of our nipple to nipple measurement on the allowance line. I did the same thing on the chest line as well. And then I connected the lines together. So now the next thing we're going to do is to draft our darts. Now to understand the right measurements for darts for any body size, you will just divide half of your nipple to nipple measurement by 2 again. So as for my client, her nipple to nipple measurement is 4 inches. So I divided it by 2 and it is 2 inches. and then I'll share that 2 inches on both sides, which is 1 inch on both sides. I hope you guys understand. So on my under bust line, I also marked 1 inch on both sides. Then on the bust point line, I came down by 0.75 inch. This is to eliminate any pointiness in the bust region. And then I'll connect those 1 inch together on a straight line. And then using a curved ruler, I'll go ahead and connect that line to the 0.75 inch I came down by. Now I use 0.75 inch because my client is busty, like my client is on the plus side a bit, but if you're on the smaller side, you can actually use half of an inch. So I'm using a curved rule to connect both of the lines to the 0.75 inch I came down by. So next I went ahead to measure out my shoulder region, divided it by 2, and then from that point I'll connect it to the points on my this point on my chest line. So this corset that I'm making for my client, she does not want her bust to be exposed at all. So we would go ahead and draw 1 inch above the chest point. But if you want yours to start from the chest point, it's totally fine. But if you want it to be like extremely covered, you can go ahead and come up from your chest line by 1 inch. So after drawing our 1 inch line, we would go ahead and draft our darts from the chest point. So for the chest point, we are also using that same 2 inches dart, which is 1 inch on both sides. But since this is a corset, would it is also advisable to tighten the chest point again by half of an inch or quarter of an inch. Half of an inch is advisable when you are drafting for plus size people, but when you are drafting for small size people, you can also extend your darts by quarter of an inch. So I didn't do that here, but I actually did that while sewing because I noticed the corset cup was a little bit more wide. Uh, the top of my corset cup was a bit wider, so I tightened it up by half of an inch. Now, if you are drafting a bustier, you can just go ahead and like curve it down to your desired cleavage line, connect it to the armhole, and you are good to go. But this is a corset. So you would mark a point depending on how low you want your cleavage to be. You can start from the chest point, but as for me, I started half an inch below the chest point. And then I came inside from the center by half an inch, and also on the bust point, I came in by half an inch. And then I connected them all together to form a straight line. So now it's time for us to draft our cup. To draft your cup, please place your curved ruler to be on the wider part of the roll. I didn't do that in mine, which actually gave me a little bit of an issue. So while drafting yours, use the widest part of your curved roll while drafting the cup. So after drafting the down, I went ahead to connect the up as well to my desired shape. And then for the other side of the cup, you would come out of the armhole by 2 inches, and then you connect it. That's one way to do it. Another way to do that is from the midpoint of your dart, you are going to measure your half of nipple to nipple measurements, mark that on your bust point, and then you connect your curved row to the under bust line and then just draw it out. I hope you guys understand, please. So you will measure half of your nipple to nipple measurements from the darts row, mark it on your bust point and just draw out your second curve. And next I went ahead to draw the upper curve, like the up part of the curve. So after that, I just went ahead to extend my armhole line because I do not want my cup and my armhole line to be on the same line. So I'll go ahead and extend my armhole by half of an inch. So it be at least half an inch lower than where the cup stopped. And now I'm just like smoothing out my armhole curve. And next thing we're going to do is to mark out the body measurements. So my client's chest line divided by 4 is 10.5 inch plus the 1 inch dart that we came out on both sides, which is 2 inch dart. That is going to be 12.5 inch plus 1 inch for joining allowance. That's going to be 13.5. We would also go ahead and mark that same 13.5 on her bust point. So next, the dart on the waist is 2 inch as well, plus 1 inch for joining is 3, and my client's waist is divided by 4 is 10 inches. So 10 plus 3 inch is 9 inches plus 3, that is 12 inches. And so I'll just go ahead and connect all the dots together. So here I remembered that my client actually asked for an inner corset dress. So I went ahead to reduce the waist measurements by half an inch again so that it will give it that tightening effect since it's going to have an inner corset. So me reducing half an inch here, in total, if you times it by 4, I reduced 4 inches in total. So we're done with drafting of the measurements. Next thing I went ahead to do was to come up by from the down of the top by 2 inches just to give it this curved effect. I came up by 2 inches and just like connected it to a point in the down of the top. So now those places where I'm shading off are not necessary. It won't be used anymore. And our top ends where this curve ends. Now the next thing we're going to do is to draft out the yoke. So based on the yoke design that my client wants, the neck point is going to be a high neck yoke. So this is me just like redrawing the neck point again. So for drawing the yoke, I came up with my curved rule and connected it to 3 inches from the midpoint. I didn't connect it all the way, and then I just like bended it to the fuller part of the curve and connected it to where I stopped. So that is the yoke. So after that, I'm just like straightening out my lines to know where my yoke starts and to know where to cut out the yoke from. And after that, I went ahead to add allowance to the shoulder points. because if you all can recall, we only added half an inch allowance for joining of the down part of the shirt, the top. So we also need half an inch allowance for joining the shoulder. And now this is me just cutting out the pattern. So while cutting, you have to be extremely careful so that you don't cut out your drawn pieces. Make sure that everything is intact while cutting. So I've cut out my patterns. So one thing you guys need to take note of, especially if you are using a yoke, is where your yoke stopped while cutting or before cutting. So you actually need to mark out that point where your yoke rested. This is going to help you while sewing. So I won't actually go into details here. You guys would see more about it while sewing. But if you are using a yoke, this is very necessary, especially when you are sewing the yoke on the fabric. It will help you to know where to place your yoke. Mark out that point that your yoke joins, and while cutting you would also mark it out. So here I'm just like adding my allowance for joining. I added half an inch allowance on all the sides of the curves that I cut out. I added half an inch allowance this on the other side of the curve as well, and this side is going to be on a fold, so there is no allowance for that. So while cutting on your fabric, always remember that this part is going to be on a fold. And on the up of the yoke, if you are folding your yoke, add half an inch allowance on this curved part and on the down part, and this center part is going to be on a fold as well. So now let's draft out the back. So for the back, I went ahead to mark out my chest point, my bust point, and my waist point. For the back, we are not going to be using an under bust point because our back does not have a bust. So we just need the chest point, the bust point, and the waist point. So if you guys notice, the waist point this time around is a bit higher than the back part. That is because my client's waist, and as well as every other person's waist, is higher at the back than the front. So here I went ahead to mark out my neck points. So as for the back, the neck is also a bit higher. So I marked 1 inch for the neck, but before that, I went ahead to connect the shoulder line to the chest line, and then I marked out my neck curve. Next, I went ahead to divide my shoulder by 2 as usual to draw my shoulder slope as usual, half of an inch by coming down by half an inch. And here I came out by half of an inch. I marked out my bust measurements and then I just connected them together. Sorry, for the back, we don't come out by half of an inch. Yeah, because our back is more broader than the front. So I've connected my armhole curve, and next is to draft out my darts. So for the back, which measurements do we use for the back darts? Any measurement you use for the darts in the front, divide that measurement by 2 and use that measurement for the back. So for the front, we used 2 inches darts. So that 2 inches, we'll divide it by 2 and we'll use that for the back. So this paper I added there was for my zipper allowance. I actually forgot to add a zipper allowance while drafting, so I decided to add a paper. So on the waist point, I came in by 1 inch to eliminate any zip bulge while sewing, and from that 1 inch I connected it to my neck point. And so after connecting that line, From that line, I'll now draw my 1-inch zip allowance. I hope you guys are following. So now I'm just going to draw my zip allowance line and then cut off any excess paper. So this 1-inch that we came in by before drafting our zip is good for eliminating any zip bulge, and it's also good to draft it before drafting your darts because our dart at the back is not entirely straight while drafting. So if we draft our darts before doing our zip allowance, it won't be straight and it would end up drawing and cleaning. So it's necessary to draft your allowance before it darts. So here I marked my nipple to nipple measurements, not from the zip allowance, but from my actual body side, and mark them on all the lines, and then I draw them on a straight line. And after I connected a straight line, and then after that I came out on both sides by 1/2 inch, which is 1 inch in total, and then I connected it to the top. So after that I went ahead to draft out my yoke. The yoke as well is going to be a high neck yoke. So I came down from my neck by 1 inch, and then I came inside from the center of my body by 3 inch as usual, connected a curve from the midpoint, and then from there I connected another curve, which gave me a yoke. Anyhow you choose to draw your yoke is fine, as long as it comes out in your desired shape. So here I actually went ahead to mark where the yoke stopped so that I would remember it while cutting. So I'll tell you guys why I always do this when sewing and how to actually place your yoke on this point while sewing. So next I'm just going ahead to mark out my measurements. At chest point 10.5 plus 1 inch join allowance, which is 11.5. Bust point, I'll go ahead and also mark that 11.5. And then on the waist point, I'll go ahead and measure out the darts, which is 1 inch, plus 1 inch join allowance, that is 2 inch. So that 2 inch, I'll add it to our waist point, which is 9 inch, and that is 11 inches. So because my clients asked for an inner corset dress, I'll reduce that 11 inch by 1/2 inch, and then I'll just connect all the measurements together. So here I went ahead to add 1/2 inch for my shoulder joining allowance. And after that, I went ahead to cut my back measurements, to cut my back pieces. So I also came down from the chest point by 1/2 inch just to give it a little bit of curved effect or curved shape. So it is totally optional. If you don't want that, you can leave it straight. So this is the back piece. As usual, I'll go ahead and mark out where is on a fold and where to add 1/2 inch. So I hope you guys learned something from this video. If you have any question, please leave it in the comment section. You can subscribe if you liked something today, and I'll see you all in the sewing video. Thank you and bye.